Hello, today we're gonna talk about refrigeration and freezing. Well, these physical hurdles are among the most popular forms of food preservation. If we talk about refrigeration, it is used mostly to slow down the action of pathogenic bacteria or pathogenic microorganisms and to extend the shelf life of the products. So, a food, rather than half a day, can withstand for a week or two without being spoiled if they are stored or treated in refrigeration conditions. In the case of freezing, the development or proliferation of pathogenic microorganisms is completely inhibited because frozen bacteria are completely inactive. Well, in general, refrigeration has no effect on the taste or texture of the food, but in this aspect, freezing is something else, is different from the refrigeration, especially with the fruits, because freezing in fruits has a huge effect. In most of cases, it changes completely the taste and the texture of the fruit. But with vegetables, this effect is in minimum. Well, the minimal effect of the refrigeration makes this process more known in food industry, of course more useful. The refrigeration and freezing are used on almost all foods like meats, fruits, vegetables, beverages, etc. Refrigeration and freezing are very important in food industry, and especially they are important in food preservation because they can help on extending the shelf life of food products or in prolonging the time of preservation of many food products. When we talk about food products, I want to emphasize that we are talking mostly for perishable foods because they are more delicate and they need more care compared to other products. Refrigeration may help to slow down the chemical and biological processes in the food. Also, refrigeration may avoid any deterioration or loss of the quality of food products. The storage life of fresh foods like meats, fish, fruits, vegetables can be extended by using refrigeration and freezing. But if we use refrigeration, the shelf life of food products will be extended by several days. But if we use freezing, the shelf life of food products will be extended by several weeks or months. Well, in this case, there are many considerations to take care about selecting the right temperature of the refrigeration or even the right temperature in the freezing and the heat transfer mechanisms. For example, when we talk about fruits and vegetables, it is known that during the storage time they continue to respire and to generate heat. But most foods can freeze over a range of temperature. We cannot use just only a single temperature, and the quality of frozen foods is greatly affected by the rate of freezing. Well, the velocity of refrigerated air affects the rate of moisture loss from the products and to the rate of heat transfer, and so forth. Well, as we said, refrigeration and freezing are mostly used to extend the shelf life of many food products. But before starting to talk about these processes, let's make an overview about the microorganisms that are presented on foods. This because the primary function of the refrigeration, especially of the refrigeration, is to slow down the growth rate of the microorganisms or even their development on foods. Because during their development they can cause many changes on food, like of flavors and odors, slime production, changes in the texture and appearances, and of course they lead to the spoilage of these foods. The most problematic foods in this case are perishable foods, which if we take them in warm temperature we will lead them to the spoilage. So to prevent this process, the largest application of storing this food product is the refrigeration. Well, microorganisms on food are divided into three big groups. Bacteria is the first one, which is are mostly developed in moisture foods. Dry and acidic foods can create undesirable conditions for their growth, but this does not mean that these conditions are unfavorable for yeasts and molds. Well, molds is the second group that affect on food product. They are found in moisture surfaces, in cheese and spoiled foods. The third group, specific viruses, these we can find in animals, in humans, and because these are presented because of the poor sanitation practices. For example, if we keep the processed and unprocessed product at the same area, we will stimulate the cross-contamination, and in this case we will lead to specific viruses to contaminate this food product. Sometimes it's about being careless. Even simple actions like hand washing can, even this process can cause contamination of the food product. When food products are contaminated by pathogenic microorganisms, they begin to adapt to the new environmental conditions. Well, in this case, let's mention the four phases of microorganisms growth, which are lag phase is the first phase. This is important because the shelf life of food product is directly proportional to the length of this phase. Well, during lag phase, the microorganisms adapt themselves to growth in new environmental conditions. It is a period where the individual microorganisms are maturing, but they are not still able to divide. During the lag phase, cells will change very little because they do not immediately reproduce in a new medium. The second one is exponential phase or adaptation period. In this phase, the population of microorganisms can be doubled 2 or more times every hour under favorable conditions that are created in foods. In this phase, the number of new microorganisms appearing per unit time is proportional to the present population of microorganisms on food. Well, the actual rate of this growth depends from the growth conditions, which may affect on the frequency of cell divisions and of course to the daughter cell surviving. The third phase is stationary phase. Well, in this phase the growth rate is equal to the death rate, and the last phase, which is the death phase, Um, the lack of nutrients and the accumulation of toxins produced by the microorganisms will slow down their growth, and in this phase many microorganisms start to die. This is the reason that this phase is called death phase or death period. The rate of growth of microorganisms in food product is directed by the combined effects of the characteristics of the food product and the environmental conditions. The characteristics of the food or the chemical structure, here we can mention the pH level, the presence of inhibitors and competing microorganisms, and water activity. When we talk about the environmental conditions, here we can mention the temperature, the relative humidity of the environment, and the air motion. When we talk about the characteristics of the food product, here we cannot do so much because we cannot change the characteristics of the product because we want to preserve it. If we change these characteristics, we change the product. So it is impossible to make changes for preserving these food product. But when we talk about environmental conditions, here we can work with different processes, like we can work with heating, cooling, ventilating, humidification, or controlling the oxygen levels into the room storage of food product. Well, the growth rate of microorganisms is a strong function of temperature, because temperature control is single most effective mechanisms for controlling the growth rate. Microorganisms prefer usually the temperature 20 to 60 degrees for their growth. The growth rate will decline if this temperature are increasing more and more, and this is the reason that low temperatures or cooling is an effective and practical way for reducing the growth rate of microorganisms, and of course extending their shelf life, extending the shelf life of perishable foods. At temperature 4 degrees or lower is considered to be a safe refrigeration temperature. Sometimes a small increase of temperature refrigeration may cause a large increase in growth rate, and these may cause considerable decrease in shelf life of the food. Another factor that affects in microbiological growth is the relative humidity of the environment. The relative humidity of the environment is the water content on the air. Well, high humidity in cold rooms is such problematic aspect, because in this case should be formed the condensate on the walls, and this is preferable for mold growth. If condensate contaminated will drip into foods, these will pose these foods into a potential health hazard. The next aspect that I'm going to discuss is the air motion. This is mostly related with the presence of the oxygen into the environment where the microorganisms are. Well, there are some microorganisms such as moths that require the presence of the oxygen in the environment for their growth. But there are some others that the presence of the oxygen it is problematic and they could not grow in this case. So for the growth of certain microorganisms can be controlled by controlling exactly the amount of oxygen in the environment. For example, the storage life of some fruits can be extended by reducing the content of the oxygen level in the storage room. Microorganisms in food products can be controlled by several factors, like preventing contamination by following strict sanitation practices. In this case, we have to mention many methods or practices that food products should undergo during its processing. For example, choosing the right methods for harvesting, because these may prevent the contamination by pathogenic microorganisms, or choosing the right methods for transportation, or choosing the right containers for transportation of these food products from the field to the factory. It is important that all these factors should be controlled in a strict way for preventing the contamination, or even during the processing, choosing the right temperature that these food products should be treated, or choosing the right humidity, or working with the changing of the pH or water activity of this food product. There are several factors that we should work during the processing of food products to prevent the contamination. The second factor is inhibiting growth by altering the environmental condition. In this case, we are talking about warehouses when we should control the temperature or relative humidity of the environment. Choosing them in the right level, we inhibit the growth of microorganisms that might be located on food product. And the last factor is destroying the microorganism by heat treatment or chemicals, using chemicals. If a food product should undergo during the high temperature treatment, most of microorganisms should be destroyed, or just adding some chemicals that are allowed to be used in food industry to destroy these food microorganisms. Also, these chemicals should not be a risk for human health. It is important to emphasize this thing. Well, the best way to minimize the contamination is to choose the right ventilation system, and especially to choose the right air filters for ventilation system, because if we do not choose the right one, with this ventilation system we will transport the bacteria in the air, and these may contaminate all food products that are on warehouses. Of course, the filters that we should use should be dry filters, because in wet ones the microorganisms should be developed, and of course they will contaminate all food products. Another problem in warehouses is the creation of condensation of the walls and ceiling because of the changes of the temperature between the warehouses and outside these warehouses. These may affect or may create this condensate that it is problematic for food conservation, but it is a positive for developing the microorganisms. That is a thing that we do not want. Drip systems should be cleaned very regularly to prevent the microbiological growth. And another problem is that raw food product and cooked food products should be taken or stored in different places because they need different conditions to be stored. For example, frozen foods must be kept at minus 18 degrees or below. The growth of microorganisms also is controlled by keeping the temperature and the relative humidity of the environment in desirable ranges. Also, microorganisms, as we mentioned, should be destroyed by treating them with high temperature. Usually, this temperature will be above 70 degrees, or by adding to these food products some chemicals, or by exposing them to ultraviolet light or solar radiation, because these processes should destroy the microorganism that might be located on food products. And of course, we will have a secure food product even with high quality.